agenda, the panel. I love our team. We all get each other's hints just like that. We have an incredible chock full agenda. So I'm going to say nothing further except for I am very grateful for each of your time and talent, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Sue. And I'm going to ask everybody to just indulge me. I'm going through to get all of our guests for our first panel highlighted up here. As I said at the top, our first panel is going to be looking at what is the state of mental wellness of our teachers and our students. And we just thought it was really important as we bring a lot of people, some of whom are working full-time in this field, and some of whom are members of the business community or community members, and may not have as much experience with what's going on in our schools right now. So we're going to hear from a diverse group of folks who are counselors, who are school leaders, who are outside experts about what their perception is of what's going on. But I see that Madam Speaker has joined us, so I'm going to first turn to her and ask Speaker Julie McCluskey if you'd like to say some words for everybody.
Oh, thank you, Barrick. What a delight it is to be here today on a topic and an issue that is so critically important to our state and our families and our kids. I am just in awe of the number of faces and names I see joining the conversation today. This project, led by PEBC and Confluence Policy and Strategy Group, is so important to those of us in the legislature. While we talk a lot about connecting with community and leaders and stakeholders when we address a particular issue, none are more important than the safety of our citizens. And when we can convene a group of this size and talent and expertise to help inform what needs to happen next from a policy perspective, I could not be more grateful. I want to highlight that I spent more than a dozen years in a school district here in the High Country. And part of my responsibilities revolved around safety training, safety protocols, crisis communications. And in those days, while we were often struck by the pain and the challenge that a safety event would cause our kids, those moments have only escalated in the decades since. And I think that's certainly it brings us all to the table with a great deal of emotion and passion in trying to bring forward concrete, actionable next steps in promoting and protecting student safety. I know without question that we already have so many school and community leaders deeply committed to improving school safety. And I am forever grateful to those people who day after day are working to make sure that every child feels safe, that every family knows that their students are in the hands of caring educators who are doing all they can to make sure that child's experience is a positive one. I also want to lift up the focus that you're about to engage in on behavioral and mental health. I know that school leaders have seen for years now the nexus between school safety and student behavioral health. And I think it is really important that we continue to work in a space that acknowledges the many pressures and community factors that are coming to bear on our kids. So thank you for having me here today. I wish I could join you for the entire conversation. I will have to leave early. But again, I want to share my gratitude and thanks to all who are leading this conversation, and just such an important moment for everyone to be at the table. Thank you for doing this good work.
Madam Speaker, thank you for your focus on this issue, for so much support during all of your leadership in the House for everything relating to education. We're honored to have you join us, and we look forward to taking the good thinking of this group that is now swelled to almost 200 and bringing it to you and your colleagues in the legislature with some ideas of how we can continue to make our schools a safer place and a more welcoming place for all of the kids, educators, and staff there. So thank you very much for joining us.
We're counting on it, Barrick. So thank you all.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
All right. So as I go through, what I'm going to be doing is introducing our panel. This first one where we're going to be talking about the state of mental wellness. I'm going to ask everybody to bear with me for just one moment while I get everybody on this list highlighted. It's a little tough to do when they only let one person in the Zoom actually control who gets spotlighted. So if you'll bear with me for about 60 seconds, I'll get everybody loaded up here. I think we're almost there. I appreciate everybody's patience with this, and we're going to dive into this conversation in just one second. What we're going to be doing is hearing from people, as I said at the top, who come to this with a variety of perspectives on this, from school culture to working as counselors to working as social and emotional support experts within their school system. Unfortunately, one of the key voices we were excited to hear from, our friend Amy Baca-Ohlert, who's president of the Colorado Education Association. She, along with a number of others, are stuck in an airport after the United Airlines and FAA meltdown. So Amy sent her regrets. She was trying to scramble to get on. If we can get her, if she lands at some point, we'll get her on the line. But what I'm going to do is ask each of our panelists to start by introducing yourself. But as you do, I'm going to ask you to go into just one very quick headline, because I'm going to dig into the depth of things with you. But as you introduce yourself and what your connection to this topic is or your role is, would love to just hear, what is your 15-second headline on what is the state of mental wellness of our kids, our educators, and our school staff? And I'm going strictly in the order of who's on my screen. So Lana, I'm going to go up to Summit County and go to you first.
Hi, everyone. It's great to meet you. Can you hear me? Perfect. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Lana. We said I use she, her pronouns. I'm Director of Equity, Family, and Community Partnership for Summit School District. I'm actually new to Colorado. I've only been here about 7 months. I am a school psychologist by training and have previously served as a mental health counselor. I would say that my 15-second statement on where we're at for mental health and youth and staff is I think this conversation is going to go down a rabbit hole of everything that we can do differently. And I think in that, just staying really optimistic of what has gone well and what the pandemic has done to advance this work. So while there is a lot of work that needs to happen, we've also destigmatized therapy. We're starting to talk about social emotional learning in an everyday type of way where it's integrated into how we can support each other as humans. And so while I understand that we are developing solutions, I just want to be super mindful of the fact that, like, I am so grateful that we are all here together to talk about this topic and to think about the good things that have come about the pandemic as well. So thank you. Great to meet everyone.
Thanks, Lana. Appreciate you naming that. Nate, thanks for joining us.
Hi, good morning. I'm Nate. I guess it's afternoon. Nate Thompson from Littleton School District. I'm still trying to figure out if Lana, if that's a real background or if that's a Zoom background, because that's Summit County. I'm assuming that's real.
Summit County, it's real.
All right. Well, we're all jealous. Nate Thompson. I'm the director of what we call social, emotional, and behavior services in Littleton School District. Clinical social worker by background, and before coming into education, I was a clinician and nonprofit administrator. And I think my headline would be a Barbara Fredrickson quote. I don't know if you've ever heard this one. It's called "The Negative Screams at You and the Positive Only Whispers." And I would follow up kind of on what Lena said, which is, I think the headlines sometimes don't accurately describe what's actually happening and the amount of really significant, sacred, and positive work that's happening in our schools, and the amount of work that schools have to do for the community and for the world right now is significant. But I do think we are at risk of catastrophizing things if we listen to the headlines. So I want to echo that, and that would be my headline.
Thanks, Nate. And we're going to dig into some of the things that you're foreshadowing there. Vanessa.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Farrell. I'm the social emotional learning specialist at the Colorado Education Initiative, where I work directly with districts and schools to try to redesign with connectedness at the center. And my headline would be that everyone is overwhelmed and self-care is not going to fix it. Neither will therapeutic intervention. Both of those things super important and not enough. And that when we focus on individual approaches, how to help myself get better, very individual, we sometimes lose sight of how powerful it is when we redesign and the structures, the school day, the mechanisms that we have in schools for climate and culture and community to start to pair together with individual improvement to make a real difference in the experiences of both adults and students in school. And it is happening in Colorado. There are some real bright spots that we can talk about.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'm going to continue on, and all of the panelists, if I get your name or your title wrong, please accept my apology and correct me. Lisa Birdsong, if you want to jump in.
Hello, I'm Lisa Birdsong. I'm a counselor in Aurora Public Schools. I've been there for 35 years. And the thing that I would say is, one, we've got to meet the kids where they're at and know where they're at and understand the dynamics of the brain. Because if I have a kid who's at a brainstem level, it doesn't matter how good of a teacher I am or a counselor or whatever, I'm not going to reach that kid. So I've got to meet the kids where they're at. But also, I think it's really important for staff and kids and stuff, because of COVID, to learn how to build relationships again and how to have that support and how to be. I notice sometimes when I go into the classrooms, the kids don't even know the name of the kid sitting next to them, you know? So I think it's really important to really start looking at how do we rebuild those relationships, meet the kids where they're at, and help them to grow.
Thank you, Lisa. Janelle.
Hi, I'm Janelle Winders, and I'm a school counselor at a middle school in Douglas County. I'm at Sagewood Middle School in Parker, and I've been a school counselor, I think I'm going on 16 years, and I've gone everywhere from Adams 14, well, DPS a little bit, Adams 14. I worked in APS with Lisa for a little bit, Cherry Creek and Douglas. So I just went down the whole eastern, north to south of the metro area. And I appreciate everything Lisa just said, because I think mine kind of piggybacks on that. I think as far as staff goes, I feel like I agree with Vanessa too. I think she said that about self-care is not enough. That's not enough. I think that staff is feeling a increased, not that they weren't pressured before, but an even bigger amount of pressure to help kids and students get up to return to that academic performance pre-COVID. And so it's an increased pressure for them. And so I think that's where staff's at. And then as far as students, we've always talked a lot about trauma-informed education and care. And I think that kind of speaks to what Lisa was saying, but also just what I've noticed is just a decrease in their level of resiliency. So being able to recover from even just minor things throughout the day, but that resiliency piece, I think we've always worked on that with kids, but I feel like that's become a much bigger focus.
Thank you, Janelle. Dr. Belansky, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong. I appreciate you joining us and bringing an outside perspective with a particular look at the rural lens.
You pronounced it perfectly.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elaine, and I am trained as a social psychologist, and I direct the Center for Rural School Health and Education, which is housed at the University of Denver. And I've been partnering with rural schools in Colorado since 1999. We partner with them to help them make schools healthy, happy places for all students. And my headline would, I really want to respect what Lana said, and I do think there is a silver lining, but my headline from rural perspective is that we are in a crisis, that crisis is affecting some students much more than others, particularly students who identify as Latinx or LGBTQ. And this is happening at a time when some rural communities are too scared to know or acknowledge that they may even have students who identify as LGBTQ. One of the things that is concerning to me is the really understanding now that some educators and administrators are facing a moral dilemma between their professional identity and their personal or religious identity. And we need to figure out how we're truly going to support the notion that all kids deserve to come to school and feel safety and belonging.
Thank you very much, Elaine. We're going to dive into this panel. I do want to give all the participants who are joining us and those who may be either just calling in or watching this after the fact a sense of what to expect. We've got this panel. I'm going to ask them a series of questions. It's going to be kind of free flowing, and I've invited all of them, and I'll do so again now. I'm going to throw out some questions, but if they tell me, hey, that's actually not the question that should be answered or the topic, I want to make this pretty free flowing. For those of you watching in real time right now, we'd invite you, if you've got questions, to drop those into the chat. We're going to make sure we're dropping those into a question catcher, and I'll feed those to the panelists as we have time for all of those. So if things come to mind that you'd like clarified, drop them into the chat and we'll get to those questions. And for the panelists, we've got a handful who have been part of CSSI since we launched earlier this spring. Some other folks who have been gracious enough to join us for either today's panel or maybe it's today's panel, and we drag you all to stay with us for the months and year ahead. In terms of audience, we've got a really diverse group dialed in today. We've got educators, we have counselors, principals, school security officers. We have a number of state leaders. Of course, we had the Speaker of the Colorado State House kick us off. Senate Minority Leader Paul Lundeen has been engaged. We have a number of state leaders from different agencies and departments. From the Department of Education, I saw Christina Monaco and Colleen O'Neill. I know Chris Harms from the School Safety Resource Center is here. We have folks from the Department of Public Health and Environment, from the Department of Human Services and Public Safety. So this panel, you've got the ear of a lot of folks, and you've got a lot of folks that just want to hear from you as we try to shape some recommendations and some ideas of how schools at the local level can really draw on the best thinking and some new partnerships to improve safety across the board. And we're talking about safety in the broadest sense. It's very easy. I think we jump to that idea of school safety means school violence, school shootings, and mass events. But we also want to talk about things like self-harm and bullying and general school culture and all of the things around mental and behavioral health that lead to too many of these issues that we've seen. So with that, what I'm going to do is throw a question. We're going to go around the horn. I'm going to invite our panelists to answer either the question I've thrown out or the version of it that they think is what this group needs to hear. But I want to pick up on your first headline. I asked you to give that 15-second headline. I think we heard some great insights into the different dynamics. And I'd invite you to talk about students or educators and staff or both. But I'd love to hear everybody's perspective on what is the state of mental wellness today versus 5 years ago? And to what extent, if at all, did the things like the pandemic and school closures and remote learning, what did that affected that have on our kids, our educators, and what we're seeing playing out in our communities? And I'm going to go in reverse order. So Elaine, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. Well, I would say that 5 years ago in rural Colorado, mental health was either the #1 priority or at least in the top 3. So that was already the case prior to COVID. Once COVID hit and schools were no longer able to be a community, an in-person community for students, the mental health issues, I think, have escalated both for educators and students. Students are feeling stressed out, they've missed time, they've missed the structure and the procedures of school. One principal has talked to us about bullying and the difficulty of keeping students in buildings, that their vaping rates are higher, attendance is low. The other thing is that students are really feeling the impact of teacher and administrative turnover. And this is a real issue in rural Colorado. They talk about changes in the school procedures. They talk about the challenges of building relationships with educators because the educators are turning over. They're talking about educators who don't really know who they are, who their family is, and what their situation is. And just finally, that staff are feeling very dysregulated, again, with some disparities around race. What we found from surveys that we've done is that teachers who identify as Latinx are, and I can get into this later, but are experiencing less mental health and wellness than other teachers. But I do want to kind of say something positive, as Lena kind of suggested, that we not go down this terrible path, which is that one thing that's changed since COVID is that principals and superintendents are much more willing to entertain the concept that mental health does need to be discussed in the school context. And students, I think, are feeling less stigmatized and more able to talk about mental health issues. So that would be the silver lining.
Thank you, Elaine. And as you folks, as you're listening, if you have questions, we're trying to wrangle questions here. If you drop them in the chat and direct them to Carrie Steele, who's one of the facilitator teams here, Carrie will get those questions to me and we'll get those asked. Janelle, when you think about what's going on now versus 5 years ago, and I don't want to presuppose that the pandemic or school closures had an effect, but if it did, what do things look like now compared to 4 or 5 years ago?
I think, like I said before, the resiliency piece seems to have shifted a little bit. I think that anxiety has increased. Now, whether that's due to the pandemic or just increases in social media, those types of things that just as a society and technologically we all advance, that we see some of that change as well. So I think we're seeing more of that anxiety along with the social anxiety, which could be obviously a result from being going through quarantines and whatnot, and then coming back into the education world. Interestingly, we typically we'll do a needs assessment. For years and years, our needs assessments at the middle school all came out with very similar, like, top needs, self-confidence, anxiety, executive functioning type academic needs. And so we had shifted gears for a few years, but we noticed this year a pretty big difference just in the climate and culture of our building, to kind of, there's the way the kids are talking, the way they're treating each other as far as respect goes, the words that they are using, the names that they are calling, all of those things. There seems to be this like lack of awareness of the impact that they have on each other, that they have on the staff. And so we gave that needs assessment again, expecting some of the same and maybe some differences from before. And, it was on a Likert scale 1 to 5. And I was floored because nothing stood out. Nothing. There wasn't, everything hovered around like this 3 from all the kids. And then if I took the 3, the middle ground out, and really just looked at the outliers, the 1s and 2s, the 4s and 5s, it was all academic. Their top 10 concerns were academic. But what we're seeing and what kids are coming and talking to us about is not necessarily academic. And then we give the same exact survey to the staff, and it was very different. So the staff was able to see some of those social emotional needs along with the academics. And the other thing, as I've started really talking with kids, is I think that there's this lack of trust that I've never experienced in my career before, a lack of trust between the students and the staff. And I don't know where that comes from, but Elaine, you were speaking to that a little bit of just, I don't know if it's a turnover or who knows, but I think they're just, to me, having this like academic focus coming from the kids, and then having that trust piece not be as high up as it normally was, and kids saying like, why am I going to tell my teacher what's going on? They're not going to do anything anyways. So those 3 things, I guess, all make up this general theme, that lack of trust of the adults, the way that they're treating each other, and not necessarily seeing some of those social emotional needs as a priority anymore. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but that's kind of those are the 3 themes I came up with by the end of this year.
I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. I think a lot of people are connecting with that. So thank you. Lisa, we talk on this group a lot about, we don't even like the term school violence, because it suggests that schools created the violence and somehow schools should alone be responsible for solving it. And I'm curious, you've been in this field for 30 years and there at Hinckley High, you've seen community violence playing out in the community right around you. And I'm curious, your perspective from that long and distinguished career in the community you're working in, how does it look differently, if at all, now versus 5 years ago, or if you want to look at a different time horizon, how does today contrast with other periods that you've seen for the mental wellness of our school communities?
For us, we were on the forefront 5 years ago. We had the restorative justice in place. We had culture of care of mental health back then. And they actually created a youth advisory board, and they worked with Choose Health, and they were doing a lot of stuff. They even had a wellness week where the kids set everything up, and each day there was a different thing you did about mental health and wellness so that they could, do that. And then there were prizes given out and stuff. The students really had a voice in a lot of this. I'm a real strong believer that you got to hear the kids' voice. They're the ones that need the help. They're the ones that need that support. And then, especially with what happened with the shooting in the parking lot, a lot of the staff, a lot of the kids felt that we never got the support that we needed. And it was unfortunate that it went down that way. And with COVID and stuff, again, a lot of the kids were isolated. They didn't have that support. They didn't have the way to build relationships, make those connections. So coming back into the schools after being out for some of the kids 2.5 years, the anxiety of the crowds in the building, the noises, all of that stuff going on. We had created a mindfulness room before COVID started. And we have found that a lot of our kids use it a lot more just because they need to go to a place that's quiet for a moment where they can sit and just rethink, or color. We even have for some of the kids a punching bag so they can just get the frustration out and then, regroup themselves. Staff, same thing. I think there's so much pressure on, we got to get out of turnaround. We've got to get the grades. We've got to get the scores. We gotta. And then the kids pick up on the anxiety of the staff. And so then when you go to the staff and ask them for, hey, let's do this. They're like, I can't. I've got to make sure the kids are getting these scores. If I don't do this, if I'm not on time with my scheduling, if I don't have them, at this place at this time. And again, I think if we look at the patterns, if we're not in the the right cortex of the brain, the kids aren't going to learn, and if the teachers aren't there, they're not going to be doing good jobs teaching. So I think it's finding that balance of, okay, how do we support everybody? How are we there for everybody? And what are the kids really saying? What are the kids' voices really saying? It was a big aha when our kids came in with the youth advisory board and said, hey, we got to do something for mental health.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'll tell you, I know we've got some representatives from COYAC, the Youth Advisory Council, on here. We're going to they've got some questions that we'll be bringing in. And part of our commitment is to get more student voice in this conversation. On this question of how have things changed in recent years and what has been the effect, Nate, you've got an interesting position out at Littleton that I don't know that every district has somebody like you with your background. What have you seen there at Littleton or talking with your colleagues statewide on what's been the shift in recent years and how do things look differently?
Yeah, thanks, Barrick. I think I agree with a lot of the things that the other panelists have said in it, and it is hard, right? Because I think everybody knows that the pandemic has impacted folks, and I don't think it's just the pandemic, but I do think education was impacted a little bit differently because of a couple of reasons. One, we were open to a lot of public scrutiny, right? I mean, parents were seeing into content, and there's questions about content and the whole mass debate. So I think what we experienced through those years, for the staff, it was really a huge shift in how they do their jobs and really forcing people to look at, do I want to keep doing this job, which happens in every profession. But we had that political and public scrutiny, and schools are just, I think, susceptible to that, right? To questions about, critical race theory and transgender and all those things that make it just another challenge. What we have seen is really, I really want to echo what Elaine said earlier, which is a a different impact based on different groups of kids and staff. And so I think it's easy to just say, well, it impacted everybody, and it did at some level, but there was a much more disparate impact for I think kids and families who are already struggling, who had predispositions. Maybe they are already struggling with poverty or housing issues or family relationship issues. What we're seeing is actually our data on discipline and mental health interventions is not yet back up to the level it was prior to the pandemic. And I know that's weird. Some districts said we went way up right after. Our discipline went up a little bit this year, but we still are not in terms of volume back to where we were prior to the pandemic. What we are seeing is more intensity. So what we're seeing is a localized intensity with some groups of kids. And I would echo this with kind of our staff needs, is that it wasn't across the board. And so what we're seeing this year, especially, is our youngest kids, our first, second, and third graders, had a significant increase in the intensity of their behaviors in a small group of those kids, not everybody. And so I think what we're really having to think about is this overall impact over the last few years. It's, there was a low level for everybody, but it was much different for some groups. And I do think when you look at, as Elaine mentioned, the racial and ethnic categories, our kids and staff who identify as LGBTQ, our families who are in poverty or struggling with housing issues that really are just facing a different level of issues, or had a different level of resources through this time. That's where I think we're seeing those localized spots, both for academics and I think for behavior and mental health. But I just think it's really interesting that, like, overall, and I'm speaking for our district, I know it may be different at other places, is the total number of behavior incidents has not gone up. But the intensity, the amount of suspensions, the amount of, kind of assaults on staff and those kind of things has gone up. So I think what I'm excited about, and I want to echo just as I had my piece here, is what Vanessa mentioned around, there is a lot of innovation happening. And that's the piece that I do think is some of that post-traumatic growth, is people are trying really creative and innovative things. And we've been lucky to have supportive board and folks here, but there's a lot of innovation going on around wellness for students, for staff, and even really for the broader community. And I think we have to capitalize on this time to think through it and not just talk drama, trauma, crisis, right? As our brains want to tell us to do. We need to think about what's the opportunity we have here to make this an ongoing part of what schools do in the community.
Thanks, Nate. Lana, and I'm going to preface this by saying, we all know that Colorado is relatively new to you, but you've sunk your teeth in pretty well up there in Summit. I think there may be a misunderstanding. People look at Summit and say, well, you're just this fancy mountain town tucked away. You don't have these issues. You've got a pretty mixed student community up there and a mixed family community.
Yeah,
what does it
absolutely.
look like up there?
Yeah, and I would say, part of the reason that I moved here was because of that. Our district is 44% minority enrollment, 39% Hispanic students. That's a huge passion of mine, and I would say that just echoing off of what Nate was talking about, while I'm not going to give you data related to Summit School District, I think it's important, just based on disproportionality and elevating the fact that we can't hide these numbers anymore. At my old school district, I was at a Title I middle school, and at that school district, we gave a self-harm assessment. That self-harm assessment for our students of color, so our Black and Brown students, which were about 75% of the student body makeup, was at about 55% of students saying that they've had thoughts of hurting themselves within the past week. That number across other schools, where it was predominantly white students, was at about 20%. So while that's not Colorado data, I think what that's showing is that we're seeing this across the nation. We're seeing that we can't keep hiding these inequities that exist, and we have to do things differently for specific populations. Within Summit School District, one of the things that we've been focused on is how do we support communities, how do we support two-generation households so that we can make sure to not only think about the direct service that the student is going to receive. I can't remember who said it earlier around, we can't keep relying on one-on-one care, right? We're never going to meet the need if we just wait to have enough clinicians. And so how do we do tier one really well? And how do we do tier one really well for students of color, for LGBTQ students? How do we do it in a way that is creating a better climate, that is creating validating environments, so that we're shifting the way that we do schools, so that we create better systems, and in turn create a culture where students want to connect with adults?
Thank you, Lana. Really appreciate that. Vanessa, I'm going to apologize. You don't get to answer that question. I've got a different one for you. Because one came in via the chat just for you. And I'm going to ask you this question. Then I'm going to go out to the panel with two questions about how we prepare and support educators and staff administrators and how we can engage more students, the way some of you have raised. But Vanessa, for you, somebody said that they love what you said about individual and therapeutic approaches being important, but never enough to really solve the issue. So a question for you, your thoughts on how should we be approaching mental health concerns from a broader perspective? And do we believe the focus should be on how schools themselves, whether it's the structures and the policies and the systems, may actually be causing or be part of the compounding harm to students? And just to get really a sense of how the education space is possibly compounding some of the traumas.
Ultimately, this was going to be the answer to the question before, really. I work with about 48 schools, and I'm just going to describe what I think I see. I think I see that the system is organized around a content economy, and human beings are really organized around a feelings economy. And as some things have shifted prior to the things that were already happening prior to COVID have simply worsened, and the system conditions have gotten a lot worse. So for example, we have about 38% more absenteeism than we had before. That stresses the whole system because the system isn't designed for people to come in and out. It's not designed for people to have traumatic experience in their lives and then be able to be out and thinking and have some space, but then come back in seamlessly. That's not the way the system works. And so here we have in this time, we have worsening absence, which stresses the whole system because it means we need to do reteaching. We don't have any clear structures for reteaching at scale, as we've had lots of learning loss. As we have learning loss, students come back and they can't figure out why they're at school because they're behind. They don't get what's happening in class. They feel stupid. They have anxiety because they feel like they're going to be called out or feel even more stupid. So there's psychological avoidance going across the board. That's one very big reason why students aren't coming to school. And when they don't come to school, that absence is felt across the system. We already had stress prior to COVID, but we have more stress now because of what people have experienced. And just like several people have mentioned, particularly Elaine, some students have particularly worsening experiences outside school and inside school, and their feelings are changing as a result. We had lower connectedness prior to COVID than we wanted. Now we saw an uptick in relationships and connectedness in 2021 that has now fallen dramatically off as everyone is exhausted and overwhelmed. We have a decrease in interest in teaching. So we have a pipeline issue of fewer people wanting to be teachers, which exacerbates the problem of not enough adults in school, when really what would be fantastic would be 2 adults in every classroom. But we have a human capital decrease, right? We don't have enough counselors. We didn't have that before. Now we have even fewer. So the pipeline of counseling is stressed. There'll never be enough therapeutic supports for one-on-one support. So we have to so here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that the system conditions have worsened. And at the same time, those worsening conditions create all kinds of feelings about the worsening conditions. And those feelings make the conditions worsen. And then, right? And then as the conditions worsen even more, we feel worse, we disengage, we act out. So we have a perfect storm. And that's what I think I'm seeing. These two things around a system that isn't designed to operate around the heart and around feelings and responding to mental health needs. That's just not how it was designed, but that's how it should be. And we're fighting with how to make that system shift happen. And that's the danger in talking about, I think, the danger in always talking about individual approaches to what is ultimately a system condition plus individual feelings. And we have to get better at meeting both of those. And so there are bright spots, absolutely. And so, for example, just talking to a high school 2 days ago, so that's a high school. Sometimes those are the hardest environments to shift in this feeling economy that I'm describing. And that high school has over 90% of staff saying they are connected to the school and well supported. over 90%. They have a 15% decrease in disciplinary incidents in 1 year. They have an increase in students reporting higher interpersonal skills and higher skills in self-regulation. And they have over 200 families routinely engaging through a piece of technology called POSIP. They're doing, and so you're like, wow, that sounds like a really bright spot. What are they doing? Well, they're doing a very intensive MTSS process. They're focusing on relationships and time for connection. They're focusing on small groups and lots of time for small groups, both adults and students. They are doing DBT, dialectical behavior therapy with students, so that we know that that's distress tolerance, becoming more and more comfortable with distress, increasing interpersonal skills, increasing mindfulness, breathing practice, and emotional regulation. That's paying off. And they're engaging with their community. They've created a graduate profile, so their community came together to chart out a vision for what skills, traits, habits, and dispositions they want their students to have. So they're working in the same, like on the same page. And so when you think about the things, so they're doing multiple things, right? At the same time, and it's really moving. I would say it's becoming where the feeling being organized for connection that then drives the ability to achieve from a content perspective.
Yep.
And that's what I think is really promising.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and appreciate we got to that promising point, because you're right. We've got all of these things that are just compounding. We've got about 6-8 minutes left in this conversation. I want to just name that the audience for this conversation. One is all of the members of this coalition, but we're going to ask you to help us put forward some recommendations about how do we leverage some of these good, bright spots? What do we need to ask the state to do more of or do less of? And where can we start to foster some partnerships and bring you the resources you need? I also want to name that in addition to our House and Senate leaders from here in Colorado, I'm seeing and getting messages right now. We've got the majority of Colorado's congressional delegation, our Congress members and our senators all represented here. They're looking to Colorado to not only turn things here in the right direction and keep going, but to show the nation. So I appreciate all of you. We've got a couple of questions here that I'm going to give everybody in the panel. I'm going to ask you to try to do 60 seconds. And I'm going to give you your choice of questions. At one end of the spectrum, we've got people asking, what do we need to do in preparation or professional development to better prepare and support our educators, our paras, our principals, our administrators, or our counselors? And the other question that I'm seeing a couple examples of is, where are the students in this? What role or greater role should students be playing in creating the systems and the structures and the solutions to some of this, whether that's through the restorative justice process or being at the table in these conversations? So I'll leave to each of you to decide which one of those questions. But at the one side, how do we better support those adults in our schools and school buildings? And at the other end, the students, the ones living with this, how do we engage them better? And on this one, I'm going to start with Lisa, and then I'll go to Janelle.
I would look at a program that goes K through 12 and build upon it with the social emotional, so like when you talk about breathing and stuff, like the little kids do the fingers up and down the starfish, breathe in, breathe out, simple things they can learn and then advance upon it. There's a lot of really good programs that can be brought in, like bionics and stuff. But I think the key piece is Jessica Murday does a great job of teaching the counselors and the social workers in Aurora Public Schools about all the different trauma, brain levels, from the brainstem to the cortex, all of that. But the teachers need to know that. The principals need to know that. The deans need to know that. They need to know how to walk into a situation when a kid's escalated and help de-escalate it. If I have a kid who slept on the streets last night, hasn't eaten in 4 days, I'm probably not going to have much success. If I, why aren't you doing your work? Why aren't you get on it? But if I have that relationship built with them and I can say, hey, you're having a real hard day today. What's going on? Let's step out in the hall for a second. And I find out this is going on, then I can get the kids the resources they need so that they can get back into being successful at school. And I think, I'm a real strong believer, like I said, our kids are the ones who created the mental health week. It wasn't us, it was them, because they knew we needed it. The student voice, meeting the kids where they're at and building it, it takes a village, it takes all of us. And if we're all working together, we can do great things for kids.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to go to Janelle and then Elaine with either end of that. How do we better train and provide development, or how do we better engage students in a meaningful way? Janelle.
Yeah, I mean, listening to everybody talk, I think there are so many great programs and interventions when you think, restorative justice, MTSS, we have the Ask a National model, all of those systems, to Vanessa's point, we've had those for a really long time. But I think they've lived in pockets. Like, who knows MTSS really well? Who knows the Ask a National model? Who knows? But to be able to spread that to spread that staff wide so that everybody is on the same page, that we are all meeting kids at the same place together, I think is important. But then, and I'm just going to call this what it is, but at the base of all of it, you have underpaid teachers, underpaid staff, and we're asking for more and more of their time. So every time I want to say, hey, staff, let's do this really great thing, the question is always, when am I going to have time to do it? And to be honest, why would you stay in a profession where you have to work 2 jobs to be able to pay your rent and your mortgage? So back to that, the stretch on the system. And I know we're not here to solve all of the financial problems of of the world, but it is a factor. It's a factor. Time and money does affect what our staff can do. And so there's a whole nother arm to this that just adds additional challenges to buildings and districts, which then affects services that are provided to students. But back to, I don't think we have to create anything new. So back to that silver lining, there are a lot of really good system-wide approaches. We're never going to get rid of the need for one-on-one, but I think what I'm seeing is really being able to tier 3 is always going to be there, but if we can put a lot of efforts into that tier 1, tier 2, even, because there are kids that came back, they're resilient, they had whatever supports they had, and they want to come and do school. But that tier 2, that middle ground, the more PD for teachers, for staff, and for the mental health support in schools, and around that tier 2, I think that's probably where we will get the most bang for our buck, if you will.
Thank you, Janelle. And I don't want to cut anybody off. I am going to say that in the next 2-3 minutes, we've got to move to the next panel. What I am going to commit, and the panelists didn't know I was going to do this, I've now got probably a dozen questions that have come in. We're capturing all of those. I'm going to circulate those back out to our panelists after today. Would love if you want to provide quick notes, or if you want to just record a quick video on your iPhone and shoot it to me. I will edit and consolidate those and post those so everybody can see those. But you guys have been such an amazing resource. I want to get these questions to you. But for now, I want to go to Elaine and then Nate and Lana with this question about how do we engage students, and how do we make sure we're supporting our educators and our staff. And then Vanessa, I'll give you that last word, but we'll go Elaine and then Nate.
Okay, I thought what I would do is share with you some responses we've gotten directly from rural high school students, just what they're telling us that they want to promote their mental health and well-being. So this is a bit of a list. Students want things to be equitable. They want to have extracurricular activities that are fun. They want field trips, which have stopped and haven't been picked up again. They want to be outdoors. They feel cooped up inside school. They want a class that's outside. They want to get fresh air. They want field studies. They want some say in the different classes and electives. They talked about how changes in school administration affects them, which I'd mentioned previously. They want to have relationships with teachers, but when there's turnover, students are feeling abandoned. There are some politics that go with that. They want to have more interactive group learning. They know that students learn differently, so they want different approaches for different students. They want to touch and feel to learn. I'll stop with that because I know time is an issue.
I appreciate that, Elaine. And I think it's so valuable to hear those direct words from kids. Nate, Lana, and then Vanessa.
I would echo a lot of this stuff. We have a youth mental health advisory group we've had for about 5 years. And actually, Vanessa will remember where it started in a CEI workshop that we took some students to, but it has been life-changing for us and really impacted what we've done in our district. So I would really recommend, if you don't have that, get an advisory group together. They are helping us build a mental health education curriculum right now for secondary students. So we will have, we'll be piloting this fall a new curriculum that every student in our secondary schools, starting with 6th and 9th grade, will get exposure to a kind of a focus on your brain and mental health. So I would just echo, get students involved, get their voice in actually the programming, not just kind of how things are going.
Thank you. Lana.
Yeah, I would echo everything that's been said. I think co-creation and co-producing the solutions. I'll read a quote that says, by placing emphasis on improving youth mental health in communities where schools are located instead of only inside of the schools, and recognizing how we could collectively address this challenge. And so I think I understand, and I think there is a need for tier 1 training around mental health first aid kind of training, right, for educators and staff. And at the same time, we need to think about what are the things that are impacting youth mental health. And those are social determinants of health. And schools cannot control that alone. So how do we partner to start to do some of that work together?
Thank you, Lana. I think that together is such an important word, and we're going to lean on all of you to make sure we've got that together happening here. Vanessa, your final thoughts on whether it's the professional support, the students, or whichever topic you think we need to hear right now.
And I'll be super fast. The thing that I hear across the board every time, without an exception, students want to talk about real stuff. They're tired of stuff that's hard being swept under the carpet and not talked about. That would be the one thing that they all say they want. They are leaders, and they are doing and leading incredible work across Colorado in schools. They're leading restorative conferences, they're peer mentoring, they're doing tutoring, there are youth councils. I mean, I could probably list and I won't, but there's like 20 ways in which students are leading the way. And this leads me to the point that I just wanted to sort of like end with. Again, if I could say just one thing that we've got to get better at doing, it's not talking about bright spots like this in isolation, where I might talk about a school and Nate might talk about a school, and we talk about a practice that's happening in this school. It doesn't go anywhere because it's happening in that one place for the benefit of that one place, but we don't have a mechanism to network together so that schools can easily learn what other schools are doing, go and see the work, talk to the people who did it, figure out how they got staff buy-in, how they paid for it, and then replicate it. And we do not have that mechanism, and we've got to have it, or we're never going to scale any of the fantastic work that is happening across Colorado. And we'll spiral into this everything is terrible place over and over again.
I think such a critical point that we don't end up having this conversation with some brilliant ideas now, and 5 years again, we're having another conversation that looks a lot the same. I'm going to be counting on you and everybody at CEI, our friends at Children's, and this group to put together a recommendation on a structure. I am sincerely appreciative of this entire panel. I think we could probably do this conversation alone for another 2 hours. We're going to move on to another one. I'm going to get out to all of you with these questions, though, and see what we can, what more we can pick your brains on. And undoubtedly, we're going to ask you all to come back. With that, thank you all. I'm going to turn it to Evan and Jamita, who are going to facilitate our next panel. Evan, I'm going to start adding everybody to the panel, and if you want to just start diving into it, we'll get going as we start hearing some local perspective on these issues.
Yeah, thanks so much, Barrick. Hey, everyone, good afternoon. If I haven't had the chance to meet you before, my name is Evan Kennedy. I'm part of the PEBC team. You already heard a little bit from our fearless leader, Sue Sava, at the beginning here. And then my colleague and co-conspirator, Jamita, and I, we wanted to put together a panel of some local leaders, as Barrick said, from around the state, to share those perspectives as folks in the communities that are out there leading school districts, leading schools, being in the superintendent, principal or charter school lead roles. I know Barrick is kind of behind the scenes on the 1s and 2s, getting those folks spotlighted out here. We know that we also want to name that last conversation that there was a lot there. So while we're having this transition, if you need to take a moment and have a little bit of a brain break, a little bit of a reset, do a little bit of some reflection on what you heard, go ahead and say that. I'll pause here for a few moments here while we get these fine individuals spotlighted up on our screen, and then we'll start with our introductions shortly in a moment here. So thank you, and thank you again, everyone, for being here, and to Barrick for working your magic on the back end so that we can see all these wonderful folks.
And whenever everybody is comfortable and good to go, you are set. You've got an impressive panel all spotlighted.
Great. So thank you again for doing that. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to ask everybody to just introduce themselves very quickly. We're going to run this quite similarly to how Barrick and Carrie ran that first panel. So, and I'm just gonna go in the order that I see you all on my screen here, and have you just, I would love to have everybody introduce themselves, tell your role, and then, really given that high level, that 15-second snapshot, what are, from your lens, how are you viewing the state of the mental wellness of our kids and our educators, through the lens that you see. The first person on my screen is Dr. Loria. So Dr. Loria, I'm gonna ask you to go first.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. Carla Loria, Superintendent of Adams 14 School District. In my, I would summarize it in my 15 seconds, what I heard, which is, from the panel before, which is exactly what I believe. Safety in schools is about social, emotional, and physical safety. But currently, we are addressing these different areas separately. So in the schools, as a leader, our efforts to address these areas are experienced as disjointed, because often all three are addressed separately. Mental health, especially in small districts, we have one mental health person for 57,000 kids. Safety, one director. So they're disjointed. They are unfunded because whereas we know the needs are greater, especially in community like mine, where over 90% of the students are coming from poverty, over 90% minority, over 60% multilingual, that we call linguistically gifted, because it's a gift to be bilingual. There are no adequate funds to address the needs that are growing each year. And it's unbalanced because sometimes when things happen, like it was said before, the shootings or anything major, it's very quick to put all the responsibilities in the schools, whereas really this is a societal issue. And we own the answer. So I'm extremely excited to being here. I've been an educator for 35 years in administration since early 2000, always working in turnaround, in transformation situations. So this is across the nation that I've seen, but today, of course, after the pandemic, things have been exacerbated. And like it was mentioned before, the stress is on the teachers alone, on the schools alone, and it needs to be resolved. So the society is very reactive that it needs to be fixed at the school alone.
Thanks so much again, Dr. Loria. We're really glad to have you here. Mike, I see you next on my screen, so I'm gonna have you introduce yourself, and then Cindy, you'll be next.
Mike Schmidt, Platte Canyon School District, about 30 minutes southwest of the Denver southwest suburbs, up in the foothills. Small rural school district, and I serve a dual role here, superintendent, and also principal of the high school. The last panel, I think, did a good job of identifying a lot of what we're seeing in terms of increased anxiety, and especially not just with our students, but with all stakeholders. And that kind of rolls into the everyday operations of the school system. As Dr. Loria mentioned, physical environment is important, and we're certainly addressing that. And I think without that, it's hard to address everything that comes after that. But at the same time, we really focus, because we're small, on those individual connections with all of our students, And I can talk about that later, but basically that's our calling card.
Mike, thank you. Cindy, and then we'll go to Tim.
Hi, I'm Cindy Rimmer. I'm the principal of Middle Park High School in Grand County, which is about 90 minutes away from Denver. We are a rural community. We pull from a very large geographic area, serving about 1,300 kids in our district. I think that because we are rural and a bit isolated, COVID, things that were seen in larger communities, it was a little bit delayed coming to us. However, last year we really did feel the effects of chronic absenteeism. About 25% of the students at the high school, that became a really big issue for us. We're also experiencing substance abuse problems and increased anxiety, as Mike just mentioned, in the form of it's showing up in the form of self-harm and in a couple of different ways, absenteeism as well. And so, although we've made it through COVID pretty well, now we're starting to see all of those things come and trying to deal with those. Although I feel very fortunate, we work closely with Vanessa and CEI and have been making some strides there and seeing some positive results that we're really excited about.
Thanks, Cindy. I knew we were going to have someone who was working with Vanessa on this panel. I just knew it.
You're very lucky.
Tim, and then Amanda, last but certainly not least.
My name's Tim Metlick. I'm the principal at Jefferson Academy, which is a charter school in Jefferson County. We have 5 different locations. Previous to this, I was a community superintendent for Jeffco, overseeing the charter schools, and then I was a principal before that. Great topic, really interesting topic, because as I look at it from the school-based side, we have I look at 3 different prongs on this. We have the hardening of the facility. How do we harden that? How do we make it safer on that side? We have the training of teachers and staff, which is always difficult to ensure that they know how to handle students. And then we have the student needs, the mental health pieces that come into play. And part of the mental health pieces is how we do our assessments, our threat assessments, our suicide assessments. How does all that work? How do we, as Dr. Nicoletti said, how do we put trees in front of these kids? So that we can not only help them, but we can also stop them if they're headed down the wrong path. So this is a really, really interesting conversation.
Thank you so much, Tim. And then Amanda.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Pouliot. I'm principal at Everett Middle School, which is located in Jeffco Public Schools. It's interesting to hear all of my colleagues talk about. I mean, I've been thinking similar things. I think in preparation for our meeting today and for our conversation today, I was thinking about 4 components of safety: emotional, relational, mental, and physical. And that often, as Dr. Loria was saying, that you have to prioritize in terms of funding what you're going to put your money toward. And often that ends up being placed toward physical safety because it's something that's immediate and it's in front of all of us at all the time. And I think that it becomes a struggle then to support students in terms, and staff members in terms of their emotional, relational, and mental health. When we're prioritizing whether we're going to purchase more cameras for our facility, or are we going to do something for social emotional wellness. So thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
And thank you for being here. I just have a couple of questions that I'm going to go through and give everybody a chance to engage with. As a reminder for those of you who are on this call live, and Jamita put a reminder in the chat, but if you have questions that you want us to put in that question bank, you can chat those to her directly. She's going to be curating those. We're going to try to get to as many of them as we can. And similar to what Barrick said, what we can do is for questions we don't get to, we can get those out to panelists after and look to put together some responses here. So with that being said, I want to start by having each of you really talk to what's your approach to supporting and maintaining that culture of safety in your schools, for your district, for your community. I think I'll probably start with the superintendents here, and really I think what I'm thinking of is as we look up to the upcoming school year, maybe what are two or three things that you're really prioritizing or that are really top of mind for you as you're getting ready for the start of this next school year. And we'll start, Dr. Loria, we'll start with you again.
Yes, thank you. Our approach to safety is, first of all, to, as a community, start understanding safety as the combination of those 3 areas. social, emotional, mental. When we talk about safety, we want to make sure that our students feel safe coming to school, and it was shared in the previous panel the reasons why. So our approach, we are a relatively small district, almost 6,000 students. We have departments of one everywhere. So we are reimagining the way that we are addressing safety. We're combining our director of physical safety and the monitors, hallway monitors that are coming in. Everybody needed to reapply. We're looking now for safety advocates. We have our mental health department and our MTSS department, also departments of one, come together. So now we have a stronger department. And we are providing throughout this summer, this is just happening, this restructure. Throughout the summer, we're providing training around de-escalation. Training also is going to be aligned with training we're providing our bus drivers, understanding that everybody has an important role. Bus drivers is the first person our students see, and the bus drivers can say, hey, Carla is coming with this, crazy look. Let's go ahead and take care of her as soon as she gets into the school. Training for our paraprofessionals, but the hallway monitors, changing them from chasing kids who are smoking to actually supporting and de-escalating students, mentoring students, having these joint trainings with social workers, because often we see a student is de-escalated in the social worker's office or counselor's office, and around the corner is escalated by the safety monitor. So we are aligning those resources and combining them with a community schools models. We have new partners that are also providing outside services during the school day in our schools, because that is when we have our students. We cannot hope that they're going to go to those services after school. So we are approaching it that way. We started a pilot in one of our middle schools last semester. It gave us great results. So we are expanding to the other middle schools and moving also to the 9th grade as we start the academies in the high school. So we are reimagining how we are approaching it so it doesn't feel disjointed. And the funding, I'm not going to be able to resolve that, but putting little pockets together, we're gonna be stronger, I believe so, and monitoring the data to see how and where we need to tweak what.
Thanks. I want to put a pin in that funding question because I have something that's related to that down the line. I appreciate the bus drivers. We've talked about that. We've talked about how all staff are a part of this. But then, Mike, I just want to, you're coming at it from, you're from a rural district. We have all of those voices here. So just a little bit from yourself, and then I'll open it up to the rest of the group here.
Yes, I think we do have an advantage to some degree in terms of trying to build those relationships with students, and we're also prioritizing our physical environment, but I think that's kind of boring. But I think the thing that we are able to do and have been able to do is just build those intentional connections with kids and multiple opportunities to just have normal conversations with kids and give them opportunities to express what they want to express, and then knowing what to do afterwards. So Tim had mentioned, things about assessment and those kinds of things. I think having those multiple opportunities for kids to just talk to adults builds that trust, but also aids in the identification process that maybe leads down the road to other interventions. So that's what we're good at. We're good at just talking to kids and trying to create those relationships. So I'll leave it at that.
We all know how key those relationships are, for sure. All right, so I'm going to open this up a little bit now. We have a charter school leader, we have a middle school principal, and we have a high school principal that are here. Maybe we'll just go in that order to see if you folks have anything that you wanted to add as far as what you're prioritizing this year. So, so Tim, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Sure. So, as Mike said, we still continue to harden the facility and do some work on keying and fobs and some of those things. But I think a lot of the work, especially in Jefferson County, and I'm sure Amanda can address this too, but with a district this big, with 160 buildings in the district, it's really important that we all actually have the same protocols in place, whether it comes to assessment or whether it comes to security issues that happen during the school day. And so Jeffco is actually really good with implementing the standard response protocols. But in the district, we worked really hard to make sure that all the schools, charters and non-charters, all follow the same process. I think Bill Robbins is on here, but I think we work with 6 or 7 different police jurisdictions inside of the one county. And so making sure that everybody is on the same plan is really important. And then I also think as money gets really tight, it's going to be interesting to see how districts respond to the assessment piece, to the threat assessments, their suicide risk assessments. Are they still going to be able to bring the teams together? It's a lot of time, it's a lot of money to bring teams together to evaluate students and to provide the pathways and safety plans we need if we need them. And this is a follow-up to I'm not diminishing the partnerships and the conversations with kids, but these are all pieces as we build one on top of the other. It'll be interesting to see how that plays against the idea that we're bringing in extra mental health supports because we have a little bit of flexibility. And so trying to give kids a little more time, trying to get earlier interventions inside the building, not only at the district level. So as these things play out, it'll be interesting to see where things land.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, Amanda, you and Tim are neighbors, so to speak. And so what resonated from that, or what would you add?
Yeah, I agree with Tim that it's nice that we have some things that are pretty system-wide, implemented in kind of a system-wide way. In Jeffco, that has been helpful. I was thinking about just perceived safety and the impact of the lack of perceived safety on all the things. So on academic achievement for students, on attendance, it's all of the things. And then when we do surveys with our students, we do them monthly, we sit around 78% of students feeling safe on a regular basis at school. And I think there are lots of components to that. So that's something we've been wrestling with as a school. The way that we're going to address that next year is, and this was spoken to a lot in our last panel, is moving toward more of a tier 1 approach to the needs of students. Not that we won't continue to provide tier 2 and tier 3 interventions, because we will, and we have a partnership with JCMH where we have JCMH services within our school and lots of other tier 2 and tier 3 mental health supports, but really focusing on that social emotional learning. The other thing we've been focusing on is we had a whole group of teachers, staff members, counselors, various people that were working this last year to try to prepare us for this next year to be a trauma-informed school. And I think that's going to be pretty critical to our work next year as well. And then also looking at how culturally responsive we are. So providing training for staff around trauma-informed instruction, around culturally responsive teaching, particularly for our students of color and for our students in the LGBTQ+ community, and providing training as well in de-escalation for all of our staff members are some things we're thinking about, because we saw post-pandemic a broader need for mental health support than we had seen in the past, and that what we were doing and have been doing in terms of social emotional learning just hasn't been working. And then we also beefed up our facilities just a little bit too in purchasing some things that will help us protect our school a little bit more.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm picking up a lot of themes across the conversation on coordinated efforts and providing tools and resources and the right training for the right people to go along with some of those physical safety aspects. Cindy, real quick, I just wonder what you would add to this conversation. You're from East Grand, another rural community that might be sort of miscast as sort of just a nice little resort area that not a little bit more complicated than that. So I'm just curious what you would bring or add to this discussion.
So I feel lucky. We've got some things in place that are going really well. According to the Healthy Kids Colorado survey, 90% of our students report that they feel safe at school, but I think they're looking at the physical aspect alone. We spend a lot of best dollars working on the physical aspects of safety. And so last year we had each staff member participated in identifying shared values and beliefs in order to really change the culture that we have at our school and make it more positive. They wrote goals for next year, And because I think, we can do all these things, but unless you have the teacher buy into what's going on, it won't be supported. And with that, we are really looking next year at training staff on how to identify concerns and offer tier 1 supports rather than just noticing it and not doing anything. Our primary strategy is to work on communication and collaboration, really, like someone else had just mentioned, having those consistent policies and protocols around expectations and discipline so that students see it's very transparent what's happening, so they can feel safe knowing that that's going to what the response will be. And then I think most importantly is encouraging students to take responsibility, to be advocates not only for themselves but for others, to be that active bystander. Like I had mentioned earlier, we're working on creating youth connections, and I have that advisory panel of students, and they know, they don't hold back. They'll tell you exactly what the school needs and what they need to feel good and feel safe. And so really leaning in on those kiddos to help us design that program. We started something this year called 9 Weeks to 9th grade, where we went down into the middle school and saw what those kids needed, brought them up to create an environment where everyone feels like they belong. And we did kind of, I guess, field day, for lack of a better term, but stop school or academic learning for a day, which really, it was a little concerning for my teachers at first, but they each taught a lesson in their passion area, whether that was tying knots or doing magic tricks or whatever the case may be. And students signed up for classes they were interested in based on their interests, not because of a student or a friend was attending the same class. And then the afternoon was team building activities all day. And although the teachers, especially at the high school level, were concerned at first about losing academic time, especially, right after AP exams, which we scheduled purposely, but before the end of the year, kids and adults just overwhelmingly wanted to do it again. Our attendance for that day was very low, which we expected, something new, but I think that it's just part of creating a tradition at the school that just builds the culture. And so, sorry, that was kind of a long-winded answer, but I think it's so important you have the teacher buy-in, so they have to be a part of the process, and students as well. We can't just do this in isolation. The kids are going to drive it themselves. We need to encourage them to participate.
Yeah. No, you're good, Cindy. We're here to learn from you, and I appreciate you lifting up culture and consistency. I think like what we're hearing from kids, and someone on the first panel mentioned, is that they're missing that, and that has effects, that we need to return to.
Yeah.
All right, Josh,
sorry, just really quickly, I forgot. Safe to Tell is such a valuable resource in the state of Colorado that I think we need training for our students and our staff around Safe to Tell. I think in my community, it's underutilized. And so we are going to spend quite a bit of time next year. It's a great resource for kids to get that information out when they don't feel comfortable. They feel more comfortable doing it anonymously through a text rather than going and telling an adult. And so we're hoping to utilize that resource a little bit more.
All right. Thank you. Thank you again for that. We appreciate it. All right. I've probably only got 5 or 6 minutes, and I kind of have a big question. So I'm going to put it out there, and then maybe I'll start with the principals this time. I'm trying to tease out both some bright spots as well as some gaps right now. And so I have a couple of ways to look at this. And so you can pick one or both of these. So one of the ways that I've wanted to think about it is, what's an example of a good community partnership that you've been able to establish, and how's that made an impact in terms of the safety for your community? And then on the other side, what's missing, right? Like, what don't you have access to, or what would you like to do, but you just can't figure out how to do it, or don't have the, or it doesn't exist yet. And then the other thing would be, around the conversation around resources, right? So I can't wave a magic wand and create more funding to put towards some of these priorities. So, with that being said, considering the current state, what could be provided in terms of support, technical or otherwise, that would be helpful for you? The shinier side of that coin, if there were more funding available, where would you prioritize putting those resources? I said I was going to start with the principals on this one. I'm going to ask everyone to, I guess, maybe channel your Faulkner and really, or not Faulkner, channel someone who can talk pretty directly to this, so that we can hopefully hear from everyone. And I'll start with you, Amanda.
Okay, and Evan, you just want us to choose one of those 3 questions, is that right?
You can pick one.
You can pick one if that's.
Okay, I'll talk about a community partnership. Our partnership with Wheat Ridge Police Department has been really, really valuable this year. They come to our events, they participate in, like, when we cook hot dogs, they help do that. And that has made a huge difference in how our students feel about the police and how they feel about interacting with the police, which I think has actually helped with Safe to Tell, because it's increased some of their willingness to participate in Safe to Tell.
All right, thank you. Cindy, I'll turn things over to you.
I feel very fortunate. We've got some great community partnerships. I think rural lends itself to that very nicely. However, what I need, or what would help, I cannot suspend students for vaping if then I don't provide any support for them. I really need substance abuse and addiction counseling for my students. And we have counselors, but they're not trained in that specific area. And so ethically, I punish students for something that then I'm not providing any education or support to help them get any better. And that's where I could really use some support.
I thank you for that specificity. That's very, very helpful. Tim, you're in the middle here. You lead a charter school. Let's have you share next.
So I'm going to go back to the partnerships are really great. And so in most of our trainings, we actually have district security and at least 2 law enforcement partners at our trainings. Whoever's close, we just invite them all in. We want them to know our buildings. It's just really important to us. I think if I could wave a magic wand, there's a lot of new technology coming out with apps, tracking apps, panic button apps that you can communicate with all the teachers in the case of emergency. They can even track locations. I think it'd be really interesting if we could wave a magic wand and fund some of those and make sure that law enforcement can actually know where people are in the case of emergency. And last, I totally agree with the Safe to Tell piece, but I do think that we need to rethink it a little bit because it has become a mechanism for targeting and bullying when it comes students to students, and it's also become a mechanism to push a political agenda when it comes to parents that don't get their way when they talk to a principal. So just an interesting dynamic in the market that we're in.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Certainly lots to consider there. All right, Mike, I guess I'll have you go next, and then Dr. Loria, I'll have you end us off. Thinking from your perspective, just taking what the questions are.
So I'm going to be a little more Steinbeck and a little less Faulkner, which is, first of all, we have a great relationship with Park County Sheriff's Office, SROs at both our locations. But more importantly, I'm going to be Captain Obvious. We need money for staffing, and rural districts in particular struggle to staff with teachers, paraprofessional assistants, bus drivers, you name it. And if I had the money, raise salaries, see if that impacts that at all. So that's it.
All right. Thank you so much. Dr. Loria, I'm going to give you the honor of the last word here before we kick things back over to Barrick to close us out.
Yes.
Actually, I'm going to have a question I'm going to try to get one question in from our group.
Yes, what is missing for us is actually the parent input. We think that we believe that how our students are going to feel safe and how our families are going to feel their students are safe when they walk into our schools. So we're working on engaging them in what is needed, what is their perception, and being part of the solution. So to that, and I know it's only one, but I'm going to jump quickly to the technical support. Community supports from the city really supports on how to help our families understand at home when they can see some of the things escalate as well. What are the resources, or how can parents support their students with that? In many cases, our parents have seen it coming and they just do not know what to do, and then the students react in school sometimes. So I believe that if there's anything that can be done from this group in helping us organize meetings like this with the city, with the police, in the individual campuses, so we can talk about it and they can share what they believe is missing, we can probably come with solutions together. Because like it was said before, it is going to take all of us, the whole village.
I want to thank you all. I have we had a lot of questions again, and so we're gonna have a process to get these out to the panelists. I wanted to highlight one and just spend a couple of minutes talking about it before I turn things over to Barrick. It's sort of directed at the superintendents, but I'd invite anyone to chime in if you have a thought about it. The question came from Chris Harms, and it's How do we convince all superintendents to focus on social emotional learning, knowing that it will pay off in academics?
Well, I can jump in there with my very personal experience here in Adams 14. It was said before how the academics, the accountability system, the assessment that the audit already said, the audit by the legislators said in last December, that is impacting our most fragile students. That is an added stressor that will generate additional social and emotional challenges. So what can be done for superintendents to understand this? We really need to have these discussions as a group and stand together to call out these issues and really demand that support, and not only from CDE and the accountability system, but also from our city managers and our mayors. I had 2 incidents of a gun in school this year, and the 2 incidents, of course, expulsions, because we know what that means. The 2 incidents, one student brought it to the school because he was afraid of what was going to happen 2 blocks down the school when he left school, not a school issue. And the other student, younger sibling, 8-year-old girl, was sick, was going to be home alone. So he took the gun because he was afraid that the girl was going to find it, be home alone. Of course, another expulsion. So this is a lot of outside and community education as well. So I think that we need to bring the group of superintendents, and I know Casey's here with Brett. This needs to be a topic of discussion because we are missing the boat and we are reacting at the school level, but we need to stop and hold everybody accountable.
Thank you for that response. Mike, do you want to add anything real quick? Then I think I've got to kick it over to Barry.
Yeah, not much, just other than that, it's not just the superintendents. I don't know many who don't believe that, how valuable SAL is, but it's trying also to get the information out to the communities, how valuable it is. I think that's important.
Thank you so much. Thanks again to our panel and to everyone for being here. Barrick, over to you, my friend.
Thank you. And I am going to also bring in my friend Sue Sava, who it's always a pleasure to partner with. We're right at time. We're going to get back together again on August 1st. And as we've said throughout, we wouldn't be able to do this without all of the really smart people who are so generously giving of your time as part of this initiative and as panelists. And panelists, you volunteer for one meeting, Sue and I are going to recruit you for the rest. We will follow up with everybody in the coming 10 days, both to solicit your ideas on the next conversations and to share our current thinking on the arc of these conversations going into the fall. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Sue, to close this out.
Okay, thank you, Barrick, my co-conspirator. And I just want to echo Barrick's gratitude. I will tell you that Madam Speaker left us and texted and said how impressed she was with what she was hearing. And you know that our track record is turning what you think needs to happen into legislative recommendations. And perhaps we may have different recommendations for the rural, for the urban. Maybe we will result in policy, maybe we won't, because we know our rural friends well and we don't want to burden anyone either. But you all will determine the outcomes of this convening. And I am thrilled that we already have pages and pages and pages of good ideas, those of us who are transcribing what you said to us today. And just know that every minute you've spent with us, we will leverage and utilize as we move recommendations forward and as we dive further into future convenings. So we are grateful for your time, and we just promise you it'll be worthwhile in terms of a return on investment on the back end.
So with that, have a safe and celebratory 4th of July weekend. I hope you're all stretching it into 4 or 5 days. If you're on the Front Range where we apparently have a tornado watch, stay safe. If you're in the mountains, you're a good place to stay up there. With that, thank you again, and we will be in touch middle of next week with next steps. So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Everyone.